blinked in the strong sunlight and gaped at his new surroundings, too terrified to ask what was happening to him and why he'd been kidnapped. He was in the grounds of some magnificent house by a lake. Poor Gennaro had never left rural Umbria and had no recognition of where he'd been brought. But he did faintly recognize the man who stood before him as the three thugs shoved and dragged him inside the big house, then threw him down on his knees on the hard marble floor. The man smiled down at him with an expression that was almost benevolent. Gennaro blinked up at him and struggled to remember where he'd seen him before. The stranger from the church. Now that Gennaro saw him more closely, he was even more confused. It was like looking into a mirror. They could have been identical twins. "What is your name?" the man asked.
Gennaro Tucci,"
Gennaro managed to quaver.
"Gennaro,"
the man said with a broad smile,
"you are a gift from God."
Chapter 1. So many times in the past, Ben Hope had vowed and declared that his crazy days of running from one adventure to another were over, and that he was going to stay put at home for the foreseeable future. And every time he'd said it, before long some new crisis had come barreling into his life and whisked him off again. The latest in a sorry, never-ending series of broken promises to himself and to others, which had sometimes made him wonder if he was cursed by fate. This time, though, he was determined to be true to his word. This was it. Mayhem, violence, war, intrigue, chasing around the world. He was done with a lot of it, once and for all. It wasn't so much that, as his long-time friend and business partner Jeff Decker sometimes joked, "We're getting too old for this shit." In his early 40s, Ben had plenty of life left in him and could still outrun, outtrain, and, if necessary, outfight guys half his age. But he would have been lying if he'd said that the recent African escapade hadn't taken a lot out of him physically and emotionally. The same went for Jeff, who'd been right there at Ben's side, in what had to be the deadliest, most complex and disturbing rescue mission either man had ever experienced, either during their time in British Special Forces and in the years since. Likewise for Tuesday Fletcher, the young ex-trooper who had not long since joined their small staff at the Laval Tactical Training Centre in rural Normandy, but already proved himself 10 times over to be a stalwart asset to the team and forged bonds of comradeship with Ben and Jeff that could never be broken. Less than a fortnight had passed since they'd all returned to Laval to find a mountain of mail waiting for them. The business was growing by the month, attracting so many bookings from military, law enforcement, and private close protection agencies worldwide looking to refine and extend their tactical skill set that it was hard to keep up with demand. Now that the operation had received a substantial cash injection in the wake of the Africa mission, they were set to grow still further. But all of that had been set aside for a week as an official Laval holiday was declared. Ben had spent that time recuperating. For most people, recuperating might have meant lying in bed, or sitting around idle, licking their wounds and feeling sorry for themselves. For Ben, it meant getting back into the punishing exercise routines he'd followed for most of his life, working back up to 1,000 push-ups a day, lifting weights, honing his marksmanship skills on Laval's pistol and rifle ranges, scaling cliffs, and sea kayaking off the Normandy coast, and going for long runs through the wintry countryside with Storm, his favourite of the pack of German shepherds that patrolled the compound. The harder Ben trained, the more he emptied his mind, and the further he left the horrors of Africa behind him. Jeff Decker was no slouch either, but he'd used his recuperation period differently. His romance with Chantal Mercier, who taught at the École Primaire in the nearby village of Saint-Arcaire, had grown more serious over the last months, and he'd spent his time off with her. In all the years Ben had known Jeff, throughout the never-ending sequence of on-off, part-time, short-term girlfriends whose names were too many to remember, he'd never seen him so committed to a relationship. He was happy for his friend, and Jeff seemed happy too. Even Jeff's French had improved. Meanwhile, Tuesday Fletcher had taken advantage of the week's holiday to fly home to London.